All right, well, let's kick it off. Welcome everybody to session 46. This is a topic that we've touched on a lot in the past, and we could frame it colloquially as like beefs between people and bands. We're thinking in terms of like conflicts and rivalries between various heavy metal artists and bands, and sometimes even within bands. And at first, we were like thinking we would cover a whole range of stuff. And then as we were doing research on it, we were like, well, maybe we can't actually talk about all of this. So, for example, something that we're going to talk about later on down the line, but we're not going to do with this one is like when one band opens for another band and the opening band blows away the other band and makes them look like jerks, or vice versa, like Aerosmith like to do, pull the plug on people's amps and stuff when they were opening for them to try to make them look bad. We're not going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about like the deeper, longer kinds of beefs that went on. And we're also not going to talk too much about like instances of pure bullying, which certainly have occurred. Like Bill Ward, even Tony Iommi in his autobiography is like, yeah, we bullied that guy, unfortunately, right? So we're not going to worry too much about that. So what kind of conflicts are we talking about? A paradigmatic one, Ozzy versus Dio. Ozzy essentially picking fights by criticizing Ronnie James Dio when he gets fired by Black Sabbath and Dio gets hired. We also have like band versus band clashes where sometimes it's real and sometimes it's not. Later on, we're going to talk about how Twisted Sister challenged Manowar to essentially like a gang fight, a rumble. And that didn't happen, fortunately. But Judas Priest versus Iron Maiden, was there anything to that? Or was it just, the fact that like Circus and Hit Parader like to stir up controversy? Well, there's some story there. And then we get internal conflicts within bands that are essentially like musician versus musician, but then they can bleed over. So a classic instance of that would be Dave Mustaine and conflict with two of the founding members of Metallica getting kicked out, getting left on the side of the road essentially, and then deciding, well, I'm going to make my own band and it's going to be better than these guys, and that's how we got Megadeth. So those are the sort of conflicts that we're thinking about, and we're going to look at the ways in which this gets carried out and continued and publicized, and we'll even talk about some where the conflicts are actually kind of fake. Some of the and Scott, I think you can attest to this. We read these music magazines, right? And we would see interviews maybe on MTV or something like that, and musicians would be saying bad things about each other, and there'd even be covers where it'd be like so and so or such a band versus such a band, and being dumb teenagers, how the hell would we know the difference, right?
And they would always get that picture. They would always get the picture of whoever said it looking mean for the like with an angry face, like so and so lashes out.
Yeah, there's a rhetorical dimension to a lot of this, but we also did see some real beefs carried out, and some of them continue on to the present day, and some of them have been kind of either the people have died, so they're not fighting anymore, or
Yeah.
they managed to get over them. So as we were like, we've talked about this a lot in the past with music history stuff, but today we're going to dig into how and why do these things arise. And here's where we get into the whole field of like ethics and personal relationships. There's a lot of conflicts that didn't have to happen, and some of them might be due to character flaws. I think a lot of them were due to drugs and alcohol and being too young. Um, but there's some reasons for why these things happened. But there might also be some positive aspects to this kind of conflict. Now, Andy says something. Oh, yeah. So this is an interesting thing to pause on. And as a musician, I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about this, Scott, because I was just a fan. So Andy says, what I found interesting when we were much younger is how fans would pick a side on behalf of the beef, even though it didn't impact them in any real way. And Ken says that's very true, especially for young teenage fans. Very common to see tribal loyalties. So, like, in my case, and I think for you too, probably, Scott, Iron Maiden versus Judas Priest. If I got to pick a side, clearly Iron Maiden,
Yeah.
even though in retrospect, I think maybe I would have chosen Judas Priest objectively. Um,
Yeah, well, that goes back to the, if they're talking trash about a band you care about, that could make you angry and get
yeah.
get you emotionally charged to pick a side and kind of join in on the I mean, that's from the publisher side, the, selling magazines
And albums probably too, right?
and albums. Oh god, absolutely. Yeah.
I wonder if that in any way impacted like merch and tours. I mean, there's no way we would find that information out. I think all of that's long lost, those ledgers and stuff. But like Ozzy Osbourne talking crap about people, especially Dio. I don't know. Maybe that boosted his profile.
I mean, for his diehard followers, yeah.
Yeah,
And that would be like a Gene Simmons thing too.
that's true. Yeah, yeah. So we figured we would start by looking at some examples, and then we'll do some more careful analysis. And this is actually kind of a good segue because there is one where stirring up all that controversy really screwed them over. And that's Quiet Riot. And we already discussed them a while back. What if Kevin Dubrow was not shooting his mouth off and running down other bands? Would Quiet Riot have had a different arc than they did? Which, just to remind ourselves, they had they struggled in LA, managed to produce two records that were only released in Japan. That's not good. Then they finally, sort of like rags to riches, Metal Health and Condition Critical. Metal Health is the number one album for a while. It's the first heavy metal album to ever make number one. And so they're on top of the world. And the stuff after that, they've never been anywhere near that as far as album sales or notoriety. And part of that is due to Kevin Dubrow creating trouble for them. So, the complaint that he had, and this is something that I don't know, maybe there's some basis to it. His complaint was that Quiet Riot had essentially opened up the field for the other LA bands in the scene, and that the other bands were not properly appreciative or grateful, or they weren't giving Quiet Riot their due. So, who are they thinking about? Motley Crue, Wasp, Rat, Dokken. There's even a Hit Parader 1984 cover, Motley Crue versus Quiet Riot, when Motley Crue is also real big, and Kevin Dubrow was saying stuff like this, and he would like pause on stage. You've talked about like um, not Buck Dharma, but in Blue Oyster Cult, the other guy giving rants on stage.
Oh, Eric Bloom.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, so Kevin Dubrow was doing rants, but they weren't like lighthearted kind of stuff. It was more like these other LA bands suck. So that's not good. He's like seeking out beefs with everybody. And then, the other key LA band is Van Halen. And, you can look at those two bands and you can see a very big difference. They both got really important guitarists early on. Eddie Van Halen, the original Quiet Riot has Randy Rhoads, right? You've got really outspoken frontman singers, Kevin Dubrow and David Lee Roth. You've got drummers that are, contributing. Alex Van Halen is a good drummer, and Frankie Banali is a good drummer. And the other ones that they had before that were good as well. And you got solid bassists. And, Michael Anthony is a really great bassist.
Yeah.
Rudy Sarzo in the classic, iteration, great bassist. Chuck Wright, good bassist. So they're kind of comparable, but one band makes it big and the other band doesn't. It's sort of like, I don't know, your cousin who you're kind of running neck and neck with, suddenly winning the lottery or getting promoted into a great position while you seem to be left behind. And Van Halen 1, that's a huge album. Van Halen 2 is not as big, but it's solid, and they just keep making good albums throughout the 70s and early 80s, whereas Quiet Riot makes two albums that go nowhere. Um, and
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody, I mean, if you've ever listened to those albums, they're not Van Halen 1. They're not that great. Um, so you can see that there's some room for, I guess, what would you call it, resentment, envy, um, feeling like you put in the time but you've been left behind, you know and I think we all struggle with things like that. But Quiet Riot didn't do well with that. There's also some beef between Eddie Van Halen and Randy Rhoads. I found this out digging around. Eddie Van Halen was, kind of shooting his mouth off. He claimed that Randy Rhoads learned everything from him. I mean, now as a guitarist, God, somebody said that about you. How would you feel?
Oh,
Everything all the good stuff you do is derivative of what they're doing.
oh yeah. That I mean, at this day, it would have bothered me when I was younger. I'd have to believe it though. But Eddie did say, yeah, the one thing he said, he would kind of give a backhand compliment. He would say, "Well, at least Randy Rhoads admits he got it from me." You know, so he's kind of Eddie's kind of the guy that the the creator of everything, and he's gonna say, because everybody says, is it Randy Rhoads or is it Eddie Van Halen? And Eddie would say, well, he even admits he took stuff from me or whatever. And I don't know what he's referring to, but like I was reading one of the Van Halen books by Steve Rosen,
Okay.
who was friends with Eddie, and he had talked about that a little bit. And because he has all the interviews he did with Eddie, and they're finally printed in their entirety. But he would say stuff about Randy Rhoads for sure. I don't
Yeah.
know if the other way around though. I don't remember hearing Randy Rhoads say anything.
No, it looked more like Randy Rhoads. He knew himself to be kind of like a junior person in their relationship, and he tried to, like, hang out with Eddie Van Halen, and Eddie Van Halen would snub him, like, at parties and stuff.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
so, that probably contributed to it. Kelly Garney, the early bassist, who, and we'll talk about him in a minute because he's part of the story as well with Quiet Riot. He claims that Randy Rhoads didn't like to compete, and it seems like Eddie Van Halen was somebody who loved to compete. So I don't know. You put people like that side by side, it's easy to see why Rhoads could be a bit more retiring. But then Rhoads leaves Quiet Riot, gets the Ozzy gig, and that's when a lot of the like the guitar gods of LA comparisons are happening.
Yeah. Yeah, the Ozzy gig. And then Kevin Dubrow actually talked smack about Ozzy, saying, well,
Yeah,
we, Randy Rhoads, got good because he was playing with us, and he's taking
and
our guitar.
coached him basically,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. So
yeah,
I mean, he talked about everybody, but definitely Ozzy, just saying, hey, that's our guitarist. We're the greatest.
yeah. Now, Quiet Riot, when you look into their past, is kind of a hotbed of conflict. So it's not just Quiet Riot versus everybody else. It's Quiet Riot versus Quiet Riot. Um, Rudy Sarzo left in '85 because he's like, I can't handle these people. And then Kevin Dubrow gets fired in '87 by the rest of the band. And in an earlier version, so I mentioned we'll talk a little bit more about Kelly Garney. So he's the bassist, and it's in the Randy Rhoads era. And he and Dubrow were constantly in conflict with each other, and it got to the level that Garney got drunk, he got into a fist fight with Randy Rhoads, and, that's sort of like to get into a fist fight with Randy Rhoads, that's really crossing some lines. It's not like, I don't know, going to a bunch of people who like to fight anyway. This is a pretty quiet, retiring guy. And then he drives and he's got a gun. He's intending to kill Kevin Dubrow. And it just so happens that he's so drunk that he crashes his car, gets arrested for drunk driving, and therefore does not kill Kevin Dubrow. So the level of conflict within that band is pretty darn high.
That's as high as it gets.
Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe with the Kevin Dubrow thing, he's not just dealing with sour grapes resentment towards all these other bands, but he's also stuck in a situation with a bunch of people that he doesn't like, who don't like him, and maybe he's directing some of it outward. But we can ask, well, what was this all about? What's fundamentally the motivating cause? You know, I mean, you can get good press, or some press at least, by running other people down, and musicians do. And I don't know, Scott, do you think that sort of like "I'm the best, these guys suck" was more common in the '80s than it is now in the musical community?
Yeah, and it's funny now at this day when now that a lot of the musicians are older, you find out some of them are, they mature, so they bury the hatchet, um, or it was fake in the first place. But the '80s was definitely a lot of flexing. Remember the band
Yeah.
Nitro? The band Nitro had what's his name, Jim Gillette, that claimed he could sing more octaves than anyone, and it was like the band was like, and the guitarist Michelangelo, he was like the fastest guitarist, and it was like they're the epitome of like
Oh,
flexing.
yeah. Yeah,
Um,
there was a lot of like, "We're faster," or "I'm faster," you
I could
know?
sing higher.
"I can beat Yngwie Malmsteen," that kind of business.
Yeah, and Yngwie was a good one that was caught up in a lot of that
Yeah.
trash talking. But no, I think you're right. I think the '80s was about, I mean, you didn't have that kind of rivalry, the same kind of rivalries in the '90s. You had rivalries, but not, I'm better. I'm better on my instrument. Or I can sing higher than everybody else. It was definitely something that happened in the '80s. I don't see so much of it happening now.
Yeah. So maybe that was part of, I don't know, the atmosphere, with
Especially
Dubrow. I mean, what do you think was we got to see this happen, like, in real time. We were
we
teenagers,
did.
reading the magazines, listening to Quiet Riot. It was on the radio all the time. Um, I mean, do you think it basically was envy or resentment or something like that?
I think so. I mean, they were pretty young back then, so it was probably um maybe insecurity, but like, yeah, envy. Certainly, like, somebody gets like Van Halen breaks, and
Yeah.
they're gonna say, well, wait a minute, we're the real deal. I don't know if it was. I wonder if it was on the band side calculated. I know the magazines were, it was calculated to get to sell magazines. I don't, the band side, it might have been legitimate envy. Because they were kind of young to, or maybe not as clever to like stir up stuff for their own sales.
Yeah. I mean, Kevin Dubrow is the one constant through that era, right? Because Randy Rhoads leaves for Ozzy's band, and then Quiet Riot effectively comes to an end. They resuscitate it, but with a new drummer, new bassist. After and Rudy Sarzo will be one of them later. Chuck Wright is before him, but Kelly Carney's definitely out of the band, right? Um, and then new guitarist Carlos Cavazo, right? So
Yeah.
those guys don't necessarily have the Van Halen's been taking up our space concern, or Motley Crue's capitalizing on what we've done. Whereas Kevin Dubrow, he's been there the whole time.
Right.
So Ken says Quiet Riot claiming they opened the field to other LA bands has some merit to it. Oh, okay. So this is a good distinction. But the constant bullish attitude did them no favors over time. So so if they, every once in a while been like, hey, we helped open the door. It's really amazing what's going on. Instead
Right.
of being like, we should be the royalty and you should be bowing down before us. So, there's different ways of using the same truth, you might say.
Right. Yeah, well, yeah, with the whole attitude of, you put it perfectly. Isn't this all great, Um, but it wasn't. It was just resentment.
Yeah, something that you've brought up a lot in sessions in the past is the virtue of magnanimity, right?
Yes.
So if you are actually like now you're finally in the spotlight. You got a number one album. You could instead of like expecting everybody else to be like looking up at you and finally giving you the credit that you should have had, you could be magnanimous and be like, well, I just hope this like opens up the scene even further. Look at how many great young bands there are who are now opening for us. I mean, there's lots of ways to be magnanimous rather than to be what would be the opposite, I guess, like spiteful or bitter or
Yeah. Right. Well, that
vain. You know,
he's definitely the opposite.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, Andy says, how much of it do you think was manufactured by the PR people, thinking Malcolm McLaren and the Sex Pistols as an example, inventing narratives and stories and creating rock characters as part of the shtick? He also managed the New York Dolls, Bow Wow Wow, Adam Ant. So image was a big part of the conversation, wondering if some of the feuds were seen as being more attention grabbing metal messaging. Yeah, some of the ones we're going to look at definitely fit the bill for that. Or they had like a core of reality, but then it was kind of overblown. I don't know that this one. I mean, I kind of get the feeling that like the magazines and MTV were like, we can't get enough of this Dubrow guy because just put him on, he'll shoot his mouth off. Whereas with some of the other ones, it's a bit more. I think it is a bit more manufactured, or in some cases like totally manufactured. So I'll just throw out an example of that. Um, you go through like the old Circus and Hit Parader covers from the 80s, and about once a year, you're going to find a this band versus this band lineup. And one that I thought was the most comical is from 87. It's Hit Parader, and it's Wasp versus Striper.
Oh,
Now, okay,
jeez.
they're both LA bands. They're both kinda, I mean, Wasp isn't really a glam band, but they occupy some of the same territory. Striper's definitely a glam band. And it was titled, Hell versus Heaven. Right?
Oh,
Wasp is the representative of hell because they're all about like hedonism and violence. I mean, they didn't have any satanic lyrics or anything. They're just
right.
about, I want to get drunk and get laid and have money and fight people and stuff like that. And then you have Striper, the soldiers under command, the soldiers
Yes.
of the Lord, you know. And did Wasp and Striper actually have a beef? I've never actually heard of any real beef. They're not even like in the same orbits.
No, I agree. Yeah, that's a really good example of manufactured.
But I think you could easily get Michael Sweet and Blackie Lawless to shoot their mouth off in an interview. Yeah, those guys, they stand against everything that we stand for. So,
Right. Right, exactly. Well, that's a see, I didn't know that one. That's a good one.
well, I don't think it had much shelf life. You
No,
know?
but like, evil versus good, or, that what a angle.
Yeah, I mean, who they should have picked would, if they wanted to do that, would have been like Venom versus Striper. But the Venom guys would have probably been like, "Who? We've never heard of these guys." So, yeah. Well, let's talk about another one that we've already mentioned before, Ozzy Osbourne versus Ronnie James Dio, and This one had some real legs to it. So Ozzy gets fired from Black Sabbath for doing too many drugs by comparison to the other guys who are also doing a lot of drugs and not showing up for recording sessions, having a bad attitude in general. Bill Ward has to actually sing one of the songs on their last album, Never Say Die. So Iommi and Butler start looking for a new singer, and they fire Ozzy effectively. And who do we get? Well, Ronnie James Dio is available because somebody else who we'll talk about is a conflict instigator. Richie Blackmore has fired Dio or either fired Dio or they parted amicably in some way from Rainbow. Dio is available, and they bring him on, and they put out two really great albums. Heaven and Hell and The Mob Rules. Interestingly, Bill Ward will leave the band in '80 because he says he can't continue without Ozzy, and so they bring in Vinny Appice, who's probably better, certainly better at that time than Bill Ward. And Circus has a 1980 cover, Black Sabbath versus Ozzy, the strange and true tale of their split. And Ozzy starts out immediately talking trash about Ronnie James Dio. Probably the funniest line is the one where he's asked about something and he goes, "Well, they got a midget to replace me." So he's making fun of Dio's height, which I don't think Dio liked much. And even, Dio seems to be a pretty even keeled kind of guy for the most part. And Vinny Appice says Ronnie had to put up with people in the front at concerts being like, "Where's Ozzy?" and holding up signs saying that. And he didn't like singing some of the songs like Iron Man and Sweet Leaf because he's a different kind of singer, but he did it anyway. And Ozzy is going to say in one interview, Sabbath is dead now. It's not that I don't like what they're doing. It's great music, what they're doing, but it's not Black Sabbath. It's a new band. It's a different band. It doesn't even remotely sound like Sabbath other than Tony Iommi's thundering riffs. It wasn't until I left that I realized how much a part of Sabbath I was. It's not like, now listen to this. It's not like losing a bass player or drummer. Now imagine Black Sabbath. There have been some albums without Geezer Butler, right? And you can put somebody like Bob Daisley in, like on The Eternal Idol, and he can hold his own. But Geezer Butler is just as important as Tony Iommi is to Black Sabbath. So you're wondering, like, what does Ozzy know about music? And he's saying this, and I like this response from Dio. He says, "Yeah, I think he's right in that he's talking about, now notice the distinction. There is no more Black Sabbath with Ozzy Osbourne in it. It's not even remotely close as far as I'm concerned. I think you'll find the riffs Tony is playing are more musical riffs, and the reason is now he has someone who can compare musically to the riffs he's playing. This is a band that has progressed where Ozzy either refused to progress or was incapable of progression. I like to think that he was incapable." So he's saying, yeah, it's a different band because Ozzy was actually holding the band back.
Right.
That, and now I don't know. This is something we could talk about. Some people are like, I really like Ozzy's voice better and stuff like that, but it's just looking at the two guys. Ozzy, other than singing, and he didn't write most of his vocals. Geezer Butler did that. The only other contributions he made to the band were playing the harmonica and playing the organ on one or two songs on, I think it's Sabbath. Which one was it? Master of Reality, right? Dio is a person who could play any instrument, um, could write songs, actually understood music, singing range and
Yeah.
power. Ozzy, he's got his distinctive voice, but compared to Dio, he's clearly second rate. So I don't know. This seems like a pretty good response,
Yeah.
pretty on point and pretty classy too. He could have been like, yeah, I mean, Ozzy, he's a buffoon. He can't actually read music. But instead, he's like, no, here's how it is different.
And yeah,
So,
I like the point about um, being able to collaborate with Tony.
mm,
That's a good point actually. Um, in other words, yeah, Ozzy Ozzy didn't have a lot to contribute to the dialogue about a tune or the riff is pretty much what he's saying. Uh,
yeah.
but yeah, I it's um that was a big one, especially with the fans. That was one that was a big one with the fans, I think, too. Um,
You mean in
as far
terms of, like, the previous fans saying, who the hell's this guy?"
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, the ones that yeah, well, the ones holding up the "Where's Ozzy" signs.
Yeah, that would be tough. I mean, similar issues you could say, like, with, Tim Ripper Owens having to take,
Oh, yeah.
the
Spick and
place of Rob Halford and Judas
Right.
Priest or Blaze
Blaze Bayley,
Bayley
I'm thinking.
Blaze Bayley, um, and Iron Maiden, I mean, there's some cases where even if it's like a mediocre singer, you just can't replace him. Vince Neil, getting replaced by, was John Corabi. John Corabi's a better singer and more of a professional, but the record company was like, "Well, the fans don't want you there, man. We gotta get Vince Neil back." So,
Right.
yeah.
That's a good point. Where it's not a it's not it doesn't always work out just because you get somebody better.
Yeah. I'm gonna take Andrew's thing in just a moment. I do wanna bring up one other thing that Dio said. Now this is this is a pretty good one. But I think, again, it's pretty on point. He says, "To reply to the things Ozzy has said is like dueling with an unarmed man. I feel like someone who has a sword up against someone who has no clue what a weapon is. I find the man to be stupid, totally devoid of intelligence, an animal. I doubt very much Ozzy could carry a tune if you gave him a radio in a suitcase and gave it to him in his hand." So he's witty, he's not just saying, "Yeah, he sucks, he's no good." He's actually saying some pretty funny and intelligent things, and some of them, I mean, it's not that Ozzy was totally unintelligent, but, he's doing a lot of drugs.
Right.
Even when he got sober, nobody was, like, looking to Ozzy for life lessons or wisdom or anything like that. Um, and, to reply to, Ozzy flailing about, "Oh, this Dio guy, sucks, no good, the band sucks." Yeah, it is like dueling with an unarmed man, I think. So he's saying, "Hey, it's unfair for me to go toe to toe with him because he's just not capable of doing that."
Exactly.
So yeah. Um, there's some other stuff about it, but maybe we'll skip over that and take what Andrew has to say. So he says, if we think of a workplace like a warehouse, bands aren't really like that. The conditions that make a band are trust, dependence, vanity, sacrifice, and a shared risk of failure. Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah.
Some of that is in a workhouse. Anyway, that's a volatile mix. If I don't like someone at work, I can just ignore them or hate on them with childlike glee. I can say it's a job and go home, but bands seem to spend a hell of a lot of time together, touring, recording, interviews, etc. If I got replaced at work, I wouldn't be that pissed. Whereas musicians seem to feel betrayed for being replaced or erased from the band's image, undercredited, publicly diminished, or treated as though their years of co creation were dispensable. Plus, there might be a whole "we are manly men who settle things in manly ways" attitude. Yeah, that's true, right? I guess we might ask, is the public discourse between them eristic, anti-logical, or dialectical? So eristic is, it comes from the word for strife, eris. Is it necessarily antagonistic?
Oh,
Is it anti-logical? In the sense of irrational, I suppose, or driven by, it'll involve some arguments, but ultimately driven by passions, right? Or dialectical. I mean, at best, it would be dialectical, where they're like figuring some things out on the way, but I don't think that happens when the conflicts are going on. Like maybe later on when they're like working things out, like, Dave Mustaine doesn't hate the guts of Metallica anymore. And he talks about that in his autobiography, but it took him like decades to get there, you know. So
yeah.
That could be a dialectical kind of thing. But yeah, I think that's right. If you're in a band with somebody, there's so many different factors. And then think about doing this when you're 18 years old or 25 years old, you know?
Yeah, and that's kind of what I mean about the motivation behind it, being young and kind of getting emotional over it rather than it being a PR move. Just seems more likely, especially the kind of people they were.
Yeah. I mean, with the Ozzy thing, you got a complicating factor, which is the influence that Sharon Osborne, originally Sharon Arden, has over him, which is, in some respects, that's sometimes positive. She like insists that he get sober for a while. Otherwise, and he said in interviews, if she hadn't done that, I would have died, because he liked doing drugs and alcohol so much. But man, did she pull a lot of vicious stuff, revising contracts,
Oh
playing
yeah,
hardball with people, the writing people out. Bob Daisley and Don Airey actually had to sue for proper writing credits and missed royalties from the songs that they composed. The whole thing about the Blizzard of Oz, it was supposed to be a band called the Blizzard of Oz, not Ozzy Osbourne solo act. Um, and they found out that it wasn't going to be that way when they saw the record, you know, um, where it's Ozzy Osbourne, Blizzard of Oz, not Blizzard of Oz.
right.
So, yeah, I
And
mean, having a character like that in the background could be problematic, you know?
and you'll hear them, people nowadays, like Bob Daisley. You'll hear people refer to it as the Blizzard of Oz band.
That's right. Yeah.
That's kind of how they talk about it now, and probably not by accident.
Yeah. And I guess you could say that it was that way. Would we call the second album, Diary of a Madman, the Blizzard of Oz band? I would say yes, because it's still the same
Yeah,
setup.
yeah. Although the cat was out of the bag by then, and they realized that it wasn't Blizzard of Oz, it was
Yeah.
Ozzy solo stuff. I wonder. I'd be curious to see when they found that out, what happened, or if they just stayed quiet because Sharon was in charge. It was basically Ozzy's project. Um, but that would
Well,
have to be a bit of a stab in the back.
yeah,
Like,
and apparently, Randy Rhoads was at times close to quitting the band. I mean, there's this whole like mythology of, oh, he lost this wonderful guitarist. You see the picture with Ozzy holding Randy up and all that. And people who were close to him were like, they got in fistfights, and Randy Rhoads was considering bailing on that band. Um, he might not have done a third album with them.
right?
So yeah. Andrew says about the Dio Ozzy feud. I would ask, oh, it's a good question. What exactly was taken from Ozzy? Friendship, employment, symbolic ownership, or identity? Was Dio a rival in his own right or the bearer of a succession of the old order? So two really great questions there. Let's take the
Oh,
second one first. So Dio coming in. So let's imagine it wasn't Ronnie James Dio that got hired for Black Sabbath, but some of the other people who did sing with Black Sabbath at different times. It could have been Ian Gillan. It could have been Ray Gillan. It could have been Tony Martin. It could have been Glenn Hughes, right? So if Glenn Hughes, who had a good reputation, he'd been in Deep Purple, he'd been in Trapeze. If he had gotten hired, would Ozzy have like found personal characteristics to focus on? Glenn Hughes, you couldn't claim that he's a little person, but he could have complained about him in some other way. um, I think he probably would have.
yeah. I don't think it was Dio specific. I agree with that. I
Yeah,
think it's whoever got the gig was going to hear about it.
yeah. I wonder too. I think Dio's right that he contributed to the band in such a way that you could not have had the mob rules under Ozzy. As sort of a counterfactual. I don't know that Glenn Hughes could have contributed so that you would have had that. When the other people are there, it's typically a Iommi Butler or just Iommi production. You think about Born Again, that's like, Ian Gillan's a great singer. I don't see him contributing to the riffs or stuff like that the way Dio might have been.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it really showed when Dio did his own project, how strong that project was,
Yeah.
leading it. So
That's a point I want to come back to for comparison too. But let's talk about Andrew's first question then. So, what was taken away from Ozzy? Was it friendship? I think at that point it wasn't friendship. Tony Iommi in his autobiography, it's pretty clear that they did not like Ozzy from the start. Um,
oh,
they put Black Sabbath together and they're like, we need a singer. And they saw an advertisement and they had actually known Ozzy from school and they went to his place. And then Iommi says that they were like, oh, it's this effing guy. So they may have like had some camaraderie over the year, but they were never like really close to each other. Now they didn't bully him like they did Bill Ward, with potentially dangerous pranks like lighting him on fire at sometimes. Tony Iommi could be kind of a prick at times, and he tells you that. So it wasn't friendship. Employment, yeah, I mean that kind of matters, right? It's your
yeah,
money that they're messing with. And Black Sabbath was notoriously bad with managing money. They blew too much of it on cocaine and,
right.
stuff like that. Um, Symbolic ownership. I think that's a big one, right? You're part of a band and you get kicked out of it. I think this is something that affected Dave Mustaine, being in Metallica, and the symbolic ownership and identity kind of go together. You're part of this thing that's generating great music, and then they boot you out. Now, Black Sabbath wasn't really generating great music with their last two albums, Technical Ecstasy and Never Say Die. And Ozzy thought so because he says, "Yeah, those
Yeah,
albums sucked," So but I think he still like getting up on stage and singing "Sweetly" for Iron Man or Black Sabbath or stuff like that.
yeah. Well, those were some of those songs were on Speak of the Devil. He even included some of that stuff on Speak of the Devil.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. And somebody who's another nice point of comparison here along those lines is Michael Schenker, who we're going to talk about in just a bit, because boy, is he a weather vane for conflict. When you go to see him play, he's been out of UFO for a long time, and he has nothing good to say about UFO, but he's going to play those songs because they're great songs, and that I would say that's part of his
Yeah,
symbolic ownership and identity. Um, so he doesn't play any of the Scorpion songs that he says that he contributed to on Love Drive. But he wasn't in, the Scorpions really that long. So
right.
now Ken says, can't prove anything, but I strongly suspect a lot of the behind the scenes controversy was due to Sharon and not Ozzy himself. She was and probably is a very shrewd manager, but in no way above using underhanded tactics. Yeah, I mean, in no way above. I mean, I would say that was her preference. It almost seems to use underhanded tactics. Um, and they were kind of a weird duo. And again, you could compare and contrast to like Ronnie James Dio. Wendy Dio is his manager, but it's not like this, Svengoolie behind the scenes pulling the strings on the puppet or anything like that. Now, granted, after he died, she had that kind of goofy, let's put Dio in a hologram
Oh, yeah.
idea, but that's about as far as it seems to have gone. Um, and going back to like the band, right? Ozzy doesn't put together the Blizzard of Oz band. Sharon kind of does that for him. Dio puts together his own band, and he knows how to run it and how to who to bring in. Jimmy Bain has credits on so many of the songs. It's clear that he not only contributed to it, but Dio didn't deprive anybody of songwriting credits, you know?
Right.
So he knew who to bring in and who to hold on to. Now, granted, Vivian Campbell and him have a beef later on, but it seems like towards the end they got over that. Oh, here's a question for you, Scott, from Andrew. In your experience in following what Dio said about Sabbath, where one musician says, "Oh, that band was nothing without me," or he was never really the band. How is that heard by other professionals like yourself?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. Um, that's a really I guess, I mean, if it was if this happened in a part of a scene that I'm in, I guess that's what you're asking.
Okay.
Um, that would that would come off as is kind of childish, to be honest. It would be disappointing to hear something like that. Um, and in going further about, like, what Ozzy said about Dio, like that too would be considered childish and uh just wrong. I mean, to put anybody down is kind of and publicly is, I guess it's reserved for the big times, but like I don't, I know situations that happen on the lower level, kind of the situations I play in, and I guess if I heard somebody say that, I'd be really disappointed.
Hmm.
Yeah, just being, what's the word? And he's just coming off as sour, you know. There's other ways to say it. There's other ways to say stuff, like you could say I'm disappointed that, or I'm hurt or whatever, but nothing without me. Oh, that's
Yeah, yeah.
that's a big.
Or yeah, claiming that somebody else really wasn't in the band. I
Right,
mean,
like, yeah, like the band, like, yeah. I mean, if that was the case, then you could have no problem starting a new band that will be just as good because it's all you.
it's interesting because I think about like Tim Ripper Owens and Judas Priest, right? Rob Halford is off the scene. He's not interested in being in Priest. He's got his own band, Fight, that he's doing stuff with. He's even like collaborating with Trent Reznor on different
Mm,
projects. So it's clear that he's not coming back anytime soon. And Judas Priest wants to continue. They've already got like the new drummer Scott Travis. So from Painkiller on, they've got kind of an updated sound, and they need somebody who can do the old Judas Priest standards, but they also want to produce new albums. And they produced two albums, and for quite a long time, those have not been available in things like Apple Music. And people were like, "What's going on? Is this like an attempt to try to erase that era from Judas Priest's legacy?" Um, he was a legitimate member of the band, and if it wasn't for him or somebody like him, the band could not have continued, right? I think you can say the same thing with Blaze Bailey. Um, if it wasn't for them, the holding a place and
right,
doing new stuff, the old member couldn't come back and resume their place. And maybe there's some gratitude that's owed because of that, rather than like just kind of playing over it. We don't talk about that era.
right. Well, speaking of deleted albums, I was gonna bring this up before with talking about Sharon, and you had brought up the, the you her being sued for the album credits.
Yeah.
Her response to that was to take
Oh,
Ultimate Sin out of print.
yeah, and to redo them with new musicians.
And the first 2 albums with new musicians, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. What
Uh,
a I mean, totally legal, but what a crappy move, you
yeah,
know?
and there was enough backlash, I remember when she replaced it, that those got pulled pretty quick.
Yeah.
That was a bad move, but, like, yeah, Ultimate Sin went out of print, I remember when CDs were still selling. Like, you couldn't find a copy of that because she didn't want any of the royalties going.
To J.K. Lee on that one.
Yeah,
Yeah. Because Phil Susan replaced Bob Daisley on
yep,
that one. And that was one of those Sharon shifts too, like, he actually like almost bent over backwards to like work with them, and she still screwed him, you know?
That's right. Yeah.
So, I mean, we could actually say that one key cause of conflict is, in some cases, just maliciousness. I think we could say that Sharon Osbourne, at least, is a person who displays a malicious character. You know, not just motivated by fear or you know rivalry or something like that. She seems to go out of her way to screw people over. You know.
Yeah. Well, this story Jakey Lee tells about recording um uh God, what why am I blanking on the album? The first album he played on with
Bark at
Bark.
the Moon. Yeah.
Yeah. So he said that they were in some remote area, and then she put a contract in front of him right before they
Yeah.
recorded that said he owns none of it. And then she said, if you don't sign it, you can go back to LA and we'll just get somebody else to do it, you
Yeah.
know. And yeah, that's it's almost bordering on spiteful.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like I mean, if there is some sort of pathological thing driving it, it's like the need to control people and
Yeah.
to put them under your thumb. So,
Yeah.
well, let's shift and talk about another example: Judas Priest, Iron Maiden. Right. So, going back to Andy's question, this is one that is more of a media manufactured conflict than some of the others. And we did have a hit parader, and I remember this one when it came out. Um, it said, "Who rules heavy metal?" And it was Judas Priest versus Iron Maiden. It was 1986. Um, so, why would that be the case? Well, they were both kind of like on top of the heavy metal world at the time. And you could say that there were other bands that were important and rising, but they were clearly at the center of traditional heavy metal, while glam and thrash were sort of on the rise. There was some pretty interesting early conflict, but it seems to have been largely instigated by Paul Di'Anno. So, and if you know much about Paul Di'Anno and Iron Maiden afterwards, that's also a conflict. So Iron Maiden opened for Judas Priest 3 times. And the first time, it was on a British part of the 1980 British Steel Tour. So Iron Maiden's coming right off of Iron Maiden. Judas Priest is, got a number of albums behind them. And Paul Di'Anno said in an interview, "We're going to blow their bollocks off of Judas Priest." So that's a jerk move, right? I mean, that's it. Instead of being like, "Yeah, it was so awesome, we're going to tour with this great band," no, we're going to blow them away, you know. And KK Downing, who also we've talked about this in the past. If there's anybody in Judas Priest who's going to get salty over stuff, it's KK Downing. And he wanted Iron Maiden replaced, and the rest of Judas Priest disagreed. And so Downing actually says in his autobiography about the tour, "I think they had a quest to unsettle and overthrow us." So he's not just associating with Paul Di'Anno, he's associating with the rest of Iron Maiden. 1981, they go on tour again. Iron Maiden's got Killers out, and Judas Priest has Point of Entry out. And in the American portion of the tour, um, which also includes, by the way, Humble Pie and Whitesnake for some of it as well, Paul Di'Anno was really getting out of hand, not just for the Judas Priest guys. He's picking fights, he's talking smack, as Rob Halford mentioned. He's also, being erratic with Iron Maiden. He's taking too many drugs, getting drunk all the time, and the other members of Iron Maiden are like, "This guy's his own problem. We're not into this." And he's like talking about fist fights with them. Then, it seems like everything's going to be fine because Paul Di'Anno's gone, right? So, World Vengeance Tour, Screaming for Vengeance, Number of the Beast are out, and Iron Maiden has now got Bruce Dickinson, and Bruce Dickinson starts some beef. He doesn't like how the stage show is being put on. Iron Maiden's got a lot of stage things, and KK Downing says the demands that they had were just physically impossible with the venues that they had. So it's some conflict back and forth. that's the last time they toured together. I think the Judas Priest guys by that time were like, yeah, it's not just the singer. These Iron Maiden guys are a pain. That said, you could say there's plenty of room for rivalry and resentment because, these two are being looked at as like on the same level, but were they on the same level? In some respects, you could say Iron Maiden might be viewed as being on a higher level slightly than Judas Priest. Think about the band composition. You got two amazing singers with great octave range, very powerful, very expressive. You've got two sets of like really iconic guitarists who both of whom can do rhythm and lead and they play really well together. Although we
Yeah.
find out from KK Downing he didn't actually like Glenn Tipton. It seems like Adrian Smith and Dave Murray really did like each other. So
Yeah.
already Maiden's starting to climb up. Drummers, Judas Priest went through quite a few drummers, but they're all good. Nico, you've got Clive Burr and then Nico McBrain, good drummers there. But the biggest difference, and I'm not knocking Ian Hill because I love him as a bassist, but he's no Steve Harris.
Yeah.
Steve Harris is a number one tier heavy metal bassist, even jazz bassists like write about, learning things from him. Ian Hill's good, but he's
Yeah.
not, he's not there when it comes to it. And then I think the other thing that really made a big difference is a manager. Iron Maiden had Rod Smallwood working hand in hand with Steve Harris. They were like a well-oiled machine, whereas Judas Priest was kind of sloppy, you know, throughout the years. And we see Iron Maiden going up and Judas Priest just kind of hovering behind them. I think that could produce some resentment on Judas Priest's part because they were around for, okay, Iron Maiden formed in 1975, Judas Priest forms and gets an album out by 75. But Iron Maiden doesn't put an album out until 1980.
Right.
And Judas Priest kind of sort of like, the Kevin Dubrow thing, they and a couple other bands are opening up the scene for the new wave of British heavy metal. So I could see how there could be some resentment there in being put on the same level, as somebody who just seemingly just started to come in, you know. Um, Ken says this so-called beef between Priest and Maiden was 80% manufactured as a marketing strategy. Over the years, I've met all of Maiden and most of Priest,
Oh,
even
wow.
as far back as the mid 80s. All of them were nothing but complimentary of each other as musicians and overall bands. The alleged beef originates from a small number of alcohol-fueled bravado rants by Paul Diano. Yeah, I mean, he was definitely the instigator, which grew into some sort of mythical rivalry that none of them wanted any part of. I mean, KK Downing seems a bitter kind of guy too, not only about Iron Maiden and other bands, but about Judas Priest itself. Um, Andrew says, was there any backlash about Halford being gay at the time? Um, I mean, he came out as gay, not in that era, but later on, I think was it like 89 or so or 90?
I
Um,
think it was about then.
yeah. Ken says when Halford came out as gay, the majority fan reaction, I remember this was, yeah, we're not surprised.
Yeah.
Carry on making awesome music. But yeah, so this is in large part a what would we call it? Media manufactured beef. But you can see how there could be, some tension and stuff like that. And it's got a nice resolution. Ian Hill has been saying for a number of years that Iron Maiden and Judas Priest should team up again before some of us die. And at that, he also pointed out like it's too late. What I always wanted to see was a Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, Motorhead, and Black Sabbath bill. And now it's too late because Lemmy's dead. The other Motorhead guys, I think, were dead by 2019 as well. And Black Sabbath, what are you going to do? I mean, Bill Ward's on his way out. Ozzy was on his way out, both in bad health. So Yeah, so that's kind of a good one for showing us where rivalries are less real, but could have occurred. I mean, the Judas Priest guys could have had a legitimate beef with Iron Maiden, seeing Iron Maiden's had like many more album sales than Judas Priest does. Are they that different in quality? I don't think so.
Well, you look at the venues they're playing too.
Yeah, yeah.
Maiden's playing bigger venues um, now.
And I
These
think for quite a while.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for a while.
yeah.
But I mean, I think you're right. It would have room for envy and all that, but not everybody's a Kevin Dubrow.
Yeah. So I mean that points to an important thing. We can talk about motivations, but we can also talk about negative factors that would keep that from happening. Like I can't imagine Steve Harris if there was. I mean, so I can't imagine it. He did have an idiot shooting his mouth off, Paul Diano. I imagine Steve Harris is, what the hell is this guy doing? We're the opening band. We need this to actually work. He's screwing stuff up with the main band. I can't picture him and Ron Smallwood, and I can't picture like Adrian Smith and Dave Murray thinking that this was a good idea either. They're pretty chill guys, right?
Yeah, very. Yeah,
So
and I haven't heard of them talking smack ever.
yeah, and we've had plenty of time for them to do so.
Yeah, they've had plenty of time. Yeah, they're pretty laid back.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about another one. And now this one's kind of a funny one. It's a conflict that didn't happen, but it didn't happen in part because of the conflict prone person at the heart of it. So you could have expected there to be bad beef between the Scorpions and UFO, right? Because it kind of looks in some of the narratives like UFO poached the lead guitarist from the Scorpions, Michael Schechner. They went on tour together, and UFO was going through a lot of turnover. They like to be a two guitar band. They had Mick Bolton, Larry Wallace replaces him. Bernie Marsden replaces Larry Wallace. And then, Bernie Marsden is going to not show up, and they're like, "Can we borrow your guitarist to the Scorpions?" And they're like, "Yeah, go ahead." So Michael Schechner goes off and plays with them, and then after the tour, Bernie Marsden is going to leave, and they're like, "Hey, do you want to join us?" And the Scorpions are going to break up shortly after that, and that's going to lead to a new iteration of them with Schenker and Klaus Meine joining with Don Road, which included, I would say their best guitarist ever, really John Roth. Um, I prefer him to Schenkner or to Jobs. That's going to be controversial, I'm sure, but also Francis Buchholz gets brought in, who just died this year, I think.
Oh,
Classic era Scorpions bassist. So it's not a
yeah.
bad thing. And reading some of the interviews, it seems like Rudolph Schenkner is happy to see Michael Schechner go off to UFO, and the attitude was, "He's your problem now." So and he is a problem for UFO. He's very talented, great stage presence. When he wants to actually play, he gets high, he gets drunk, he walks off a stage. He doesn't. Sometimes they can't find the guy; they don't know where the hell he is. He writes a good bit of music, but he's trouble, right? And so, eventually he gets kicked out of UFO and he rejoins the Scorpions. And here's where we can see the controversy, right? He's credited on 3 songs on Love Drive, and he claims that he actually wrote all of them. That's a little implausible, you know, but
Right.
it seems like typical Michael Schenkner stuff. And then in '79, he starts his own, Michael Schenkner group, MSG. And I would say that he's actually giving Richie Blackmore a run for his money in conflicts with musicians in his own band with people that he hires over the years, you know? He also rejoins UFO for a couple periods, and he's still talking smack today, you know? In a 2018 interview, he's like, bands like UFO and the Scorpions are trying to fool the audience, and I'm not part of that world, meaning that they're not really the bands anymore. They're just, nostalgia bands. He calls his brother a bully and says, I don't trust him. I don't think any normal person would. And other people have had things to say about him, and it seems to be so. I like this one from Rudolph Schenker. My brother wants to be one of the best guitar players in the world. I want to play in one of the 30 biggest rock and roll bands in the world. So Michael Schenker, it's all about, me as a person. Rudolph Schenker wants a band that's going to succeed. Um, and Andy Parker from UFO said that Michael never has a good thing to say about his brothers or the Scorpions. I've seen so much vitriol written that Michael said about his brother, but as I understand it, his brothers bailed him out more than once on occasions, even giving him part of the royalties when he went broke. So he helped him out, and he's like, there doesn't seem to be much love lost between them, but there you go. So you got two bands that could have been in conflict with each other, but in fact, there's a figure who is in conflict with both of them and many other people as well. you know,
Yeah, especially when Michael Schenker was when he was drunk. I mean, I don't know if you
yeah,
ever saw some of those YouTube clips when he was back in UFO. It was pretty bad. It was he couldn't play. I mean, at
yeah.
all. It wasn't like he was drunk and playing great or anything. He was to the point where he couldn't play. Um, but yeah, that's really interesting. Before this, I didn't think about those two bands with the playing together with the common person of Michael Schenker.
Yeah, and they have played together in the past after that tour, where Shankner effectively, got recruited, we could say.
Yeah.
So, well, let's talk now. We've got some good examples, I think, in front of us. Are there any common elements or lessons that we can draw before we look at some other ones? Um, well, I think one thing we could say is that, and maybe this has to do with being young or immature, sort of like when we watch sitcoms or we watch drama shows. um, there seem to be a lot of misunderstandings of the situation that they're in on the part of the different people involved, and misreadings of others. You take what they're doing as like an attack on you or cutting you out when they're not really doing that sort of thing. And then you say something, and then they respond to you with hostility, and you're like, see, I knew it. I knew that bastard was trying to, take the royalties, freeze me out. And you see this happening even with like the controversy that led to Dio leaving Black Sabbath about, he's accused of coming in and boosting his and Vinny Appice's, or I think at that time it was Cozy Powell, right? Their tracks and lowering the tracks for um, Geezer Butler and Tony Iommi, and Dio's like, yeah, that's complete bullshit, right? But you say something like that to another musician, and they could be like, yeah, that screw that guy. So I don't know. What do you think? Um, that seems to be a prevalent cause.
The misunderstandings.
Yeah, and misreading other people's actions or words or
Yeah, that could. I mean, it seems like there were people were easily set off. So even the illusion or of some kind of put down, even in just succeeding
yeah,
in some cases. Um, yeah, they, especially when you're taking clips from or sentences and quotes from some musicians, there's uh there's not room for discussion. It's not like, somebody calls someone up and says, "Hey, what did you mean by that?"
Yeah.
It kind of comes back to the tough guy thing, I think,
Yeah,
too.
Ken says a very common element seems to be overinflated ego. So if you do have a
Yes,
overinflated ego, it's really easy to be kind of touchy. I think a lot of times that goes with insecurity too. I mean, you make it big and you could actually think that you're that talented and that great that you deserve the
right.
level of fame that you now have that you didn't have last year. Or you could be like, you could have the sort of imposter syndrome. I hope they don't figure out that I actually am not that good, you know?
And that could lead to the tough talk, trying to
Yeah.
cover it up.
So I think that is definitely one aspect of it. Um, I think there's also, and this could be connected with it, resentments that build up and get held on to. And some of them could be, feeling disrespected. So, Randy Rhoads shows up and he thinks Eddie Van Halen is really great and he wants to talk to him, and Eddie Van Halen snubs him. Okay, that's being disrespected, you know.
Yeah,
Kevin Dubrow saying that none of you people would be anything if it wasn't for us. That's definitely disrespect. Paul Diano saying, "Yeah, we're going to blow their bollocks off." That's disrespectful.
yeah,
Um, and it could be also like a perceived lack of reciprocity. Hey, we're good to you, but you're not good to us, or ingratitude. Why, you're the opening band. Why are you talking smack?
right.
We're giving you a chance here.
Or, yeah, you've been invited.
Yeah. So I,
Yeah.
I think that kind of plays a big role in some of these conflicts. I think some of it too may just stem from you're in the same space and there's only so much money to go around. There's only so many slots. It's kind of natural that you're going to compete with other people. So, for example, you could imagine Judas Priest and Iron Maiden being in competition with each other in their heyday. And if you said, "Yeah, you guys are, the sonic space that you're occupying, you're not just in competition with each other and maybe Saxon, you're also in competition with Armored Saint," they'd probably be like, "Who the hell are they?" You know? I mean, but they're in that same kind of space. They're influenced by Judas Priest and Iron Maiden and doing great, middle of the way kinda traditional heavy metal in LA at the time. So I think, I don't know, maybe there's something about doing the same kind of thing that makes you in likely to be in competition, and if you're not very mature, you're gonna view that as they're your rival. Rat, Dokken, Motley Crue, they're all kind of in the same space in LA,
Well,
at
if you
the same time.
ju just to put a funny spin on it, I mean, you're not gonna see a rivalry between Rat and REO Speedwagon.
I mean, if you did, something else is going on. It's not
Something else is
rivalry, it's
going on.
craziness, right?
Exactly, and that would be, that they're part of different scenes. I think, you
Yeah.
tend to, when you're in a specific scene, that Kevin DeBrow, that statement about "we paved the way" was meant for the people in his genre, because that's what he's saying. Like, I made it possible for these bands like us.
Yeah, he's not saying, "Billy Idol, you owe me."
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah. Another thing we could say that some people actually are unjust or greedy. They take more than their fair share of resources. We talked about Sharon Osbourne, she seems to fit that bill. It could also be like they need to be the person who's in control and on top. And this is where Richie Blackmore like comes to mind. He has some legitimate stuff. He's like, the people I would fire, it's because they couldn't play to the level that I wanted them to play. And he was like, sometimes it was because of drugs or other stuff, or they're being lazy. And I don't put up with that for 1 minute. But he seems to be pretty quick on the trigger to fire people. As a matter of fact, some of them would just find out, by like a phone call. I think it was either I think it was Graham Bonnet who talked about that. Finding out from one of the other band members that both of them had been fired. You know?
Oh my God.
Yeah. Um, so was Richie Blackmore trying to take the money? No, but I think he just wanted more than his fair share of control. He couldn't collaborate with other people effectively.
Yeah.
He needed things to be his way. But some people, really, they do. A good example of this, accept, right? So there's a reason why you're not going to see a original lineup of accept, and that's because Wolf Hoffman and his wife managed to get basically all the rights to all the songs, and cut everybody else out. She was the manager, not married to him at the time, but she was the manager of the band, and they pulled kind of some fast ones. And even Peter Baltes doesn't want to work with them, it seems, anymore. So and you can see it. We've talked about this before. When Herman Frank, one of the classic era people, was there, when we saw them in New York City, you could tell the contempt that Wolf Hoffman was like exuding towards his rhythm guitarist on stage, and you're like, what the hell is that about? So I think that can certainly lead to problems, right?
Yeah. Well, that's big if an audience member can spot it.
Yeah, yeah. Um, we got to say that drugs and alcohol and maybe some other kinds of hedonism definitely played a part in this. You can take people who are just kind of halfway messed up, get them high, and now they're going to really be, prone to misinterpreting each other, or more
Well, there you go.
competitive than they need to be, or stuff like that. Poor decision makers, I guess.
Yeah.
So, and then, we can say some people are just hard to get along with and prone to generate conflicts. I mean, we've talked about Kevin Dubrow and Michael Schenker and Richie Blackmore. Dave Mustaine is very open about this in his autobiography, rather, I should say, that, he was kind of a not pretentious, because he was very good, but conflict prone a-hole,
Right.
he sought out conflict when he didn't need to. So if you got a Dave Mustaine in the band, you're probably going to have some trouble.
Yeah.
Or who else would we put in there, in the metal world, where it just seems like they somehow draw conflict?
Um, well, definitely, we've been talking about him. Definitely Blackmore.
Oh, Axl Rose.
Axl Rose. That's a good
Yeah.
one.
Andy says Lars Ulrich. I think so. I mean,
That's that. Yeah.
some kind of monster showed that he couldn't even get along with James Hetfield well, right?
Yeah. Um, yeah. And he's
Oh,
he's
Ken,
picture of
Ken
controversy.
says Lars versus Metallica fans. So I think we're going all the way back to Napster with that, right?
That right. That's right. Yeah. That was a big large one.
Yeah. Um, I
Uh,
mean,
s- singers and guitar players. There's a lot of rivalries between them in a band, but it's
yeah,
usually the singer or the guitar player that most of the time. I know Lars is a drummer, but
yeah.
uh, it's usually one or the other that's shooting their mouth off.
I guess because they have the opportunity, right? Because they're frontmen.
Right. Yeah, and they're always kind of in competition for the spotlight,
Yeah.
especially in the 80s.
Unless you're a bassist who sings like Lemmy, right? Who's
Right.
clearly the band leader, or you're a bassist who everybody like looks to on the stage, like Steve Harris. He's not the official band leader, but he kind of is.
He
You
kind of
know,
is.
um, but those two are less prone to shoot their mouth off about other bands. You know.
Yeah.
Oh, Andrew brings up the guy from Burzum that burned down churches and murdered people. Yeah, and went to prison for a while. That was an interesting conflict in the '90s in the black metal community where it actually like kept escalating. And I think in part because and this is total speculation on my part. There's certain genres of music where you know, you're gonna keep on having to amp it up higher and higher and higher, in order to, like, surpass what the previous people did. So black metal with destruction and death and toughness and that sort of thing. I think the glam metal scene kinda burnt itself out with the, straight out hedonism. We can party harder than anybody else. Well, how are you gonna party harder than a bunch of guys who are already doing heroin and coke and at the
Right.
strip clubs all the time. At a certain point, you hit like well, if we do any more of this, we're going to die, or
Yeah.
somebody's going to die, kind of thing. And Guns N' Roses kind of, represents that, right? Um, they were all getting, just totally baked and getting in fights with other people. Some of the fights that they had, like with Motley Crue, had to do with people like having sex with each other's wives. You know,
Oh, I
Once
didn't
you
know
get to
that.
that point, your rivalry is on a whole different level, I think,
It's a whole different level.
You're not like, "We write better songs than you," It's now about adultery and things like that, so
Talk about
now,
disrespect.
here's an interesting thing. Oh, yeah, didn't Jeff Hanneman collect Nazi memorabilia? That could cause conflict. Yeah, and interestingly, somebody who you could also say, "Well, why didn't that cause conflict for him?" Who very, um openly did that was Lemmy from Motorhead. But he talks in interviews. He's like, "Yeah, I'm not a Nazi. I am not for racism. I don't like those guys, but I find the stuff fascinating, and I can't stop buying these things." You know? So, yeah, I guess if you really do identify yourself with National Socialism, and you're like, "Yeah, this is a good thing," you're probably going to stir up some controversy. Now, this leads to an interesting question then. So, Scott, like you brought up REO Speedwagon. We could say, okay, what were the bands that REO Speedwagon was competing against in the same like musical space, right? Would it be Journey? Would it be the sort of it's hard rock, but it's also softer. It's got ballads, great harmonies, willing to play just about anywhere. REO Speedwagon's notorious for playing at county fairs. Um,
Yeah.
you don't see them like bad mouthing each other in the press and being like, those guys in Journey, they suck compared to us.
Well, that's a good point.
So is there something about heavy metal, or at least heavy metal in like the 70s and 80s and 90s that maybe made musicians more prone to conflicts emerging and not being resolved well? Or is it just something that happens across genres? I mean, definitely happens with rap, right? I mean, that it's notorious for people dissing each other, but that's also kind of fairly aggressive and countercultural kind of music genre in the '80s. Punk, I suppose you could say
Yeah,
punk
punk.
people might be prone to that.
Well, you've got audience members that are more diehard and a little more emotionally attached to the music. I think we've talked about what makes a metalhead
Yeah,
or common things. It's definitely much more emotionally heated. And you get a different kind of response. I think if Kevin Cronin from REO Speedwagon were to say something negative, it would fall flat on the floor because
yeah,
the fans aren't into that. Um, that kind of what do you call camp? Camp
yeah.
is part of this camp.
I think about like when we saw Hall and Oates recently, and now there's no opportunity to see them anymore because they're totally split up because uh, Daryl Hall and John Oates can't stand each other. And it appears that a lot more people can't stand Hall than can't stand Oates.
Yeah,
And no, on the one hand, I don't think in their heyday you would have heard Hall and Oates saying, "Yeah, these other what were they called? Like White Soul or stuff like that bands.
Yeah.
They're no good, not like us," you know. Um, but you could tell on stage that Hall was kicked off with everybody, you know, during the performance.
Oh God.
He would turn off his mic and then like yell at the tech and stuff like that. And you could see Oates over there just kind of like, oh, I guess we're back to this shit again. You know?
I saw them maybe 8 years ago, and it was the same thing. He was just yelling at the monitor guy.
Yeah,
He couldn't hear himself, and he would just make comments to the audience about, well, why would I think anything would change with this crew? You know, blaming
yeah.
the fact that he's having an off vocal night on everybody but himself.
I wonder. So the weirdest thing for that concert, from my perspective, and I don't know if he did that with yours, was before the concert started, they up on like they got the big screen. They had us all watching this show that he does, and I don't remember what it was called, but it's like at his home studio, and he invites people in, and he like sits
Carol's
down with
house.
them. Yeah, yeah. So they had us watch like a whole friggin' episode of that, and we're all like, "What's going on here? Why are we watching this crap? Are we gonna watch like John Oates do that next? You know,
Right.
is Oates gonna like show up or something in this? What's the deal? You know?" And no, he's that egocentric that he thought that would be like a, I don't know, a value add for the fans who wanna come see him, you know? But I mean, that's sort of, who was saying that before? Ken was saying, you know, overinflated egos. That seems like, you know, a clear case of overinflated ego. But the conflict is just within the band. It's not beefing with other bands or musicians, you know,
Well,
outside
that's
of
it.
it.
Yeah. Yeah, he's definitely, you could tell live he's cursing people out, but he's not talking in interviews about other bands, you
Yeah.
know.
Whereas
Spe-
in the heavy metal scene, that was so prevalent, you know?
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you have an emotionally charged audience too, so you get bang for your buck when you start talking smack, you know. People get have opinions about it.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, so
Um,
long as you don't, like, provoke a riot or something in the concert, I guess you're okay, you know?
right. Yeah, well, yeah. So I don't know if I've ever been to I probably have been to a show where the lead singer put down another band, but it would have been a heavy metal show, I think. I couldn't picture seeing uh
I think I saw Van Halen, after the 5150 album came out on their tour, and it was, you know, very, let me introduce you to, you know, our new singer, and also he's bringing a rhythm guitar in, Sammy Hagar, and stuff like that. And I think if I remember right, there was like a little bit of, it wasn't like outright David Lee Roth sucks, we're glad we kicked him out, but there was like little bits and pieces of saying things, and you're like, oh, what's that about, you know?
right. And that
I
was
think
that
I think Alex Van Halen actually said it's nice to have somebody who can, both sing and play guitar, you know, and sing well, you know? So, yeah.
Yeah. And he went on to side note, I guess, didn't Alex Van Halen go on to not mention the Sammy Hagar stuff in his book?
Recently, yeah. That's
Yeah.
weird. I mean, because he's the longest,
Right.
singer with them, right? So,
Yeah, they put
yeah.
out more albums.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting one, right? Because we've got multiple different conflicts and beefs going on. Um We've got, you know, Van Halen itself versus David Lee Roth, right?
Yeah.
And Michael Anthony didn't like to take positions on this sort of stuff. He unfortunately gets caught in the crossfire later on, and
Yeah,
then
he
you
does.
get David Lee Roth's out of the picture. Sammy Hagar comes in. David Lee Roth's doing his solo career. He clearly is pissed off at the Van Halen brothers about it. He's going to try to beat them, and you know, and then they can't get along with Sammy Hagar. and they boot him out, and then they boot Michael Anthony out for not cutting off ties with Sammy Hagar. And by that point, you're like, I think that's actually something on those Van Halen brothers' side, maybe.
Right.
When you're cutting off somebody who's a peacemaker for being a peacemaker, you got a problem there.
Yeah. Well, let's not forget about the rivalry between Steve Vai and Eddie Van Halen. There was a
Oh,
fan.
right.
It was a fan rivalry,
Yeah.
and it turns out, you hear Steve Vai talk now. He has nothing but respect for Eddie Van Halen. But back then, it was, the team David Lee Roth would have signs saying Eddie who, you know,
Yeah.
and it turned into the fans kind of splitting and creating a rivalry.
Yeah, I mean, you have something kind of similar too with once Doc and George Lynch leaves and forms the Lynch Mob. There's no way he's not in competition with his old band, right?
That's right. Yeah. There's going to be
Who
talk, especially with the fans.
who was the guitarist who replaced him? I wouldn't
Uh,
want to be stepping into his shoes.
no. It was Reb Beach actually,
Okay.
which is fine because Reb Beach is his own. He's already an established name. It,
Yeah,
it would have
yeah.
been harder if it was somebody that they picked up from LA that nobody knew. But I think it was Reb Beach all the time. Um, but and he did a great job. They put out one album, at least one album with Reb. Erase the Slate, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we mentioned we'd talk about a few that were like completely manufactured. So we already mentioned Wasp versus Striper. Um, there were some Def Leppard figured into some interesting ones early on in the 80s. So there was, believe it or not, a Def Leppard versus Iron Maiden in 1983. It was called Heavy Metal Championship, right? Now, are those 2 in competition at all? No, not remotely. And then it gets
No.
even worse. These are Hit Parader. Def Leppard versus Judas Priest, Heavy Metal Heroes in 1984. So you can tell, like, these magazines, they kind of can't resist creating fake controversies. And it was still going on in the 90s. There was a cover, Guns N' Roses versus Metallica in 1992. And you're like, how in the hell are they in competition with each other? You
Right.
know? So another one that was kind of common to frame was Rat versus Motley Crue, but it turns out these guys actually liked each other. Some of them collaborated on side projects together, and the one thing that I did find kind of interesting, but I don't think there's any like real legs to it. So Stephen Percy gave an interview where he was talking about Monsters of Rock, right? And the fact that Rat could have been invited for Dawkins' place in Monsters of Rock. And here's what he said: there was a method to their madness. Before Sammy, David Lee Roth, was truly running the show. So it's intriguing. I'm not sure. Maybe they didn't want any bands to pose as competition, but there was no competition. Rat wasn't in competition with anyone. We didn't view Motley or those bands like Armored Saint or Wasp as rivals. We're still friends. But he is saying maybe Van Halen chose a 1988 Dokken instead of a 1988 Rat, when Rat were like pretty much a powerhouse, to not go on tour in Monsters of Rock because they didn't want to be upstaged. Now,
Interesting.
they did get upstaged, as it turns out, because of one of the other support bands, Metallica. By the end of the 1988 Monsters of Rock tour, more people were coming, they were saying, to see Metallica than to see Van Halen.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
so they kind of picked the wrong strategy for that. I don't know if there's anything behind this, but it does make sense, but it seems more like a business thing. It's not like Rat was snubbed and sidelined, and it's not like they were fuck Van Halen or anything like that
Right.
afterwards. So yeah. Now, so there's clearly plenty of manufactured controversies that are going on. Um, Here's something to think about though, before we talk about a few other ones. Is it always bad to have conflict or rivalries? There could be some positive aspects to it. I mean, for one thing, it's publicity, right? And bands can always use publicity. Sometimes it's bad publicity, like Kevin Dubrow with Quiet Riot. But if a cover has Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, you know, rivals with each other, even though they're not really rivals with each other, maybe you listen to both of them. I don't know. What do you think about that idea?
Um, yeah, I mean, the old any news is good news. Um, you know, negative press is valuable because it gets people interested. It gets your name in print. It kind of makes it an advertisement.
Yeah,
Um, but I mean, I guess it gives people something to talk about, and of course the tabloids, the the music magazines love it. They can't get enough of that.
back in the day, radio stations, the music shows, people would bring up, what are the latest remarks by this person about that person.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
MTV did a lot of that too, right?
MTV was big on that.
Yeah. So maybe there's something there, provided you don't cross certain lines. If you're like, yeah, I hate those guys in Judas Priest. I would like to run over their children with a lawnmower. Well, people are going to be like, "Whoa, that's going too far. I don't think I want to be with you guys."
Yeah,
Um, there's also, we could say friendly competition. I'd be curious to hear what you have to say about this on your side, Scott. Does having a rivalry with another musician who is challenging you, not by like calling you up, but just by being good in your area, does that, as they say, iron sharpens iron? Does that help to, bring out better stuff in you? You're like, I gotta be able to measure up to what this guy's doing because he's up in the game.
it could. Yeah, it could work as uh, raising the bar. You know,
Okay.
someone else raises the bar, whether it's let's take for example, a band has a great live show with like explosions and lasers and stuff. That could be something to say, hey, our show is kind of boring next to that.
Yeah, yeah,
It could be something just as much as that, not even just on the musical side, but um, yeah, it could make it eventually just better for the audience, and the band personally too. But raising the bar, I think when you say friendly competition, I think about the bar being raised and trying to, you know, in the end, you want to give the audience a good show, and that's really what it ends up being.
yeah.
I wonder if a few times bands were blown off stage, if that was, nothing bad was said. It was just the opening band, you know, stole the show. I wonder if that would make them go back to the drawing board, that they got a little lazy because they got big and the other band was young and hungry.
That's something. I mean, we're going to do the next show about those sorts of instances, and I think about some of the cases that I've read about, where like Black Sabbath toured with Kiss, and the Black Sabbath guys were like, these guys are actually, like you said, young and hungry. They're all like on top of their game. We're getting kind of sloppy. We kind of need to fix it up. And then apparently something like that happened with Kiss and Van Halen, where Van Halen were the young punks who are like, really on top of their music, and Kiss are like, oh, we're getting kind of sloppy too, and they were. I mean,
Yeah,
Ace and Peter Chris were getting drunk and high all the time. So,
right.
yeah, I think there could be something to that. Like, I mean, provided you're not just like, well, screw it. There's nothing we can do. Um,
Right.
it could be a challenge to like get your act together, I guess.
Well, especially if you have a band doing tour support where they're gonna it's gonna be happening every night.
Yeah.
Uh, you
Getting
know,
your nose rubbed in it every night, you know?
yeah, you know, it'll at least change your perspective. Maybe get a few rehearsals going and come up with some cool surprises the audience might like. Um,
Yeah, that's a good point, yeah. Now, what about, unfriendly competition? So I have in mind, like, as the paradigmatic case of that, Dave Mustaine, right? He's in Metallica, there's conflicts between them, they boy, they really do him dirty. They go to New York and they're like, "Yeah, buddy, you're out of the band. You're gonna have to find your own way home." Um, and he's pissed. He writes about being on the Greyhound bus and just like seething all the way back. Think about how many times the Greyhound bus stops from New York to LA, you know?
oh God, yeah,
But that inspires him to create a band that will be heavier, according to him, heavier, faster, tighter, just better than Metallica itself. He's going to outdo Metallica at their own game, and you get Megadeth coming out of that. And you know, if you put those first like three Metallica albums against the first three Megadeth albums, I'm willing to say they're all like equally top tier. You know,
yeah,
they're different kinds of albums. You know, both really have amazing bassists doing their really cool stuff, contributing. Dave Ellefson is more jazzy. Cliff Burton is just, I mean, just a monster. You know, it's hard to even say what he is. You've got singers who are raw, composing great lyrics, playing their rhythm guitar, occasionally soloing. Great, um, lead guitarists. Actually, maybe Megadeth has an advantage over Metallica when it comes to drummer, because they've got a really great kind of jazzy drummer at first, and then they go through some other great ones, and Metallica's always got Lars Ulrich. But I mean, if it wasn't for getting kicked out of Metallica, we wouldn't have Megadeth, and I think we're benefited by having somebody who is so thoroughly pissed off and hateful and resentful that he
right.
produces this stuff, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. That's an excellent example. That's probably
Yeah.
the example.
I don't know that it always works out like that. I mean, we could look at Paul Di'Anno. Does he ever produce anything really good after Iron Maiden, even though he's not like at the level of sheer like I would burn the world down anger that Dave Mustaine is, but he's pretty pissed, you know.
Yeah,
It doesn't result in him producing great stuff.
that's
Um,
true.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. He in then in later years he would just show up and do the Maiden stuff that he
yeah.
was part of, and that didn't draw a big crowd.
What's your feeling about David Lee Roth after Van Halen? Is he pissed at them? Does he view himself as like they are the ones for me to top with my stuff, or is he kind of moving on?
I mean, there's the people point out that the album was called Eat 'Em and Smile,
Yeah,
and then Van Halen after came out with OU812. So like, in the titles themselves, it seemed to be a rivalry. Uh,
yeah,
and David Lee Roth was out to get his band to blow away Van Halen. He got Billy Sheehan and Vi and Bissonette.
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
maybe that's another good case of like producing something good because of that. Um, are there any others that you can think of where you're like, well, sucks for what they went through at the time, but look at what they ended up producing.
Um, it would definitely be in the metal world. I can't think of anyone else. Um, I mean, it wasn't a rivalry thing, but Bruce Dickinson did put out his solo albums,
Right.
but that
Yeah.
wasn't that
That
was
was more he wanted to do his own thing, I think, and he was tired
yeah,
of Iron Maiden stuff.
right.
Same thing with what with Fist, or what was the other band that he had, a solo band that Halford. Well, it was called Halford, right? I think. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um, that was clearly different kind of stuff, but that's more like I want to explore my own territory.
right. Rather than trying to show somebody up.
Yeah. So maybe there aren't that many cases that we can easily think of bitter rivalry that produces great projects, you know?
Yeah,
Or maybe it's just kind of accidental. You got all that talent there, and you got the anger as a fuel. And I mean, Megadeth stuff is pretty angry music. It's
yeah.
thematic, right? So, Andrew's got a question for you. Have you seen bands where the split really happened before the announcement because they were no longer acting like a team, like in rehearsal or something?
um, God, that's a great question.
Yeah.
I've been witness to that. Um, I um, I think my first club band that kind of happened
Oh,
where the
really?
guitarist. Yeah, it was a band that was kind of big around Boston. I was only 18, but um, I auditioned for a band, and it turns out that there was just disagreements about like things down to the set list. There's arguments over what whose songs they were going to play. So they had a falling out with the guitarist, but it had been going on for a long time. It was just a bad relationship. Um, but and then he actually he didn't do a solo album, but he started this other band that was supposed to be like all his ideas that the band I replaced him with. So that was definitely on a lesser level than the big bands. I mean, more B and C rating. But yeah, um, but a contractual agreement. Um, oh, I see. Actually, congratulate. Oh, I sorry. It's Ken. You put a question there. Um, no, yeah. Before the announcement, I just heard about it after it, but I heard all the inside dirt when I joined the band. So yeah, but that's about as far as I got. Um, with bands. There was somewhere there was another example of the drummer wasn't showing up, and I don't know if it was because of drugs and alcohol, but we've heard that story before.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was kind of like there was one too many times that the drummer didn't show up, and then they had to talk and fired him. But that was going on. But as far as yeah, so it was kind of like very disrespectful, just not showing up to gigs. Um, and rehearsals, like it could be just as bad. Everybody spends their time doing that. So tension within the band with disrespect, I guess.
It's interesting with the drugs and alcohol thing, right? Because you can have somebody like Ozzy Osbourne who will say, I don't understand why they kicked me out for being drunk and high because they were drunk and high all the time. And their response can be, yeah, we were, but not to the level that you were.
Right,
We were still able to like function and play and get things done. Clearly, we weren't like doing as well as we should be doing, but you, buddy, were really, really out there. And there's kind of a legitimate complaint there. Well, if it's just the drugs, how come you guys get a pass and I don't? Right?
right. Well, it's what happens as a result of it. Yeah, if you stop showing up or you're not performing well. Yeah.
Oh, I hadn't thought about this. Andrew had a question here. What about Saxon? Didn't they have a rivalry between Biff's Saxon and the other guy's Saxon? So yeah, the other guy's Saxon is the Dawson, was it Dawson Oliver Saxon? So it's got some of the original members who were kicked out of the band for selling merch out in the parking lot unlicensed. And the rest of the band were like, "No, you guys got to go. Well, you have to go." And then they picked up another guy, and there were actually legal battles. We talked about this way back when we did a show about um, rival versions of the same band. There were two rats out there for a while that actually also got decided in the court of law. Um, Two Queensryches,
Those two
right?
Queensryches, yeah, that was
There's a couple others as well, but it seems like, yeah, the Dawson and I can forget the other guy's name, Oliver, I think. They really have a beef with the Saxon that's fronted by Biff Byford. Um, but nobody pays attention to them. It's just, the one that's actually, and they had to call it like, I don't know, they could use the Saxon name, but they had to like, it's almost like an asterisk uh, with
oh,
it or something like that. So, oh yeah, Ken points out endless versions of Venom. Yeah, you've got Venom, Venom Inc., and different people go in and out of them, right? So yeah, that one's kind of a mess as well. And when you see like Venom is on tour, you got to like look up, okay, well, which Venom are we talking about?
right.
So yeah, I think that's a factor in it. There were two other ones that we were going to talk about before we get to the top of the hour and really need to finish up. One of them is David Coverdale and John Sykes, who
Oh,
used to
yeah.
be really tight, and things went sideways, and they've talked trash about each other for a long time. I think that's Coverdale's fault, and I don't. I'd be curious to see what your take is, Scott. And I think it's in part because so Whitesnake was a gritty bluesy band doing great stuff, as we mentioned, touring with Judas Priest, all the way up to when the 1987 Whitesnake album was coming out. So the band is doing great, and then David Coverdale basically fires everybody. And he
Yeah.
does it because he wants people to be more photogenic for MTV, and he wants to soften the music. So we get some cool, power ballads and stuff like that on that 87 album. But people like John Sykes are like pushed out. And I could understand. So it'd be one thing if you're like, listen, man, it's just not working out. We're not doing well. But he had no expectation that this was going to happen. So it's like a gut punch. In a case like that, I think that's David Coverdale's fault. You know.
Yeah. In the stories I've heard, like Adrian Vandenberg, when he went to do the solo for Here I Go Again, he said it was really uncomfortable for him because Coverdale and Sykes had showed up to the recording studio, and Coverdale and Sykes were having a fight.
Yeah.
And meanwhile he has to track the solo, which John Sykes is 95% of the album. And yeah, there was kind of like a thankless job because Sykes was a big part of a lot of those tunes,
Yeah.
and his sound was just huge. And he went off to form Blue Murder,
Yep.
which I thought was amazing. I mean, they didn't do great; they didn't get past clubs, but the quality was fantastic. I love that band.
Yep. So that's a good example of a rivalry or conflict where we can say it was about money. It was about relevance. It was and
Right?
and Coverdale sold his bandmates out.
Yeah.
I guess in Coverdale's mind, he was probably like, "Well, it's my White Snake, so I
Right.
get to do what I want with it." But that's kind of a jerk move. The other one that we mentioned before, Twisted Sister versus Manowar. So Hanoi Rocks and Manowar talked some smack about Twisted Sister in Kerrang, and they called Twisted Sister sissy boys with makeup. So D. Snyder says, I wrote a letter to the magazine calling them out for a fight. And Manowar said, yeah, man, we'll have a battle of the bands to see who the greater band is. And D. Snyder said, no, not a battle of the bands. My fist, your face. So it's starting to ramp up. And then we announced, this is D. Snyder, that we were meeting them, and the media came and fans came. And this is before Come Out and Play, was coming out, and I had the bullhorn, and he was doing the thing from the Warriors, going around saying, "Manowar, come out and play," and anyway, they didn't show up, and but Lemmy was there, and Lemmy was calling them Mano Wimp, and they were like, see, they're afraid to come by us, and the press is there, so this is kind of egging Snyder on, and then Snyder's like, we're going to go to their concert and pull them off of the stage. I'm going to beat the crap out of them in front of their audience. um, and it didn't end up happening like that. And interestingly, the Hanoi Rocks guys were like, we don't really want this beef, we're not into that sort of thing. And so Ross the Boss, who'd been in a band with Mark Mendoza, sent Mark a letter saying, we can't apologize to you. We're Manowar. Could you just please stop this? Can we like let it go? And so Mendoza said, we'll let it go. You shut your mouth. We'll let it because we're friends. But if any crap happens again, I'm going to give this letter to Kerrang magazine to publish. And that was the end of the story. So the backstory is it manufactured conflict? Kind of. But Dee Snider was ready to beat people up over it. And apparently Lemmy was like waiting in the wings, ready to like fight as well. So a conflict that never truly came to fruition, but could have turned kind of ugly. I mean, Dee Snider was super into lifting weights every day, and he was
Right.
ready to fight.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Ooh. But it was the '80s, right? That
Yeah.
machismo, bravado. They would have been like in their late 20s, probably. I'm guessing early
Yeah.
30s at best. Big and buff and ready to throw down. I mean, the funniest aspect of it is that Lemmy was like, it's sort of like that joke uh, about pugnacious people, and two of them are fighting, and another guy comes along and he's like, "Hey, excuse me, gents, is this a private matter or can anybody get involved?" You know? So
That's great.
yeah. So maybe we'll end this one here on that positive note about conflicts. That one's more of a funny story than anything else in retrospect. But it could have gone sideways and turned out very badly. Somebody could have broken a bottle and cut somebody, or who
Yeah.
knows. So anything else that you want to say about conflicts, Scott, other than maybe we should avoid them? Or
Well, it doesn't seem that we're having much of that these days in you
oh,
know,
that's a good point. Yeah.
it could have been more of a sign of the times when this stuff was breaking out. Um but yeah, I don't we heard about it. Maybe it was also because it was before social media and we got our uh we got our information from Hit Parader and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Um
But it's probably also a factor of age and maturity. I mean, a lot of these people are now in their 60s, 70s.
yeah.
They've buried hatchets, or they just don't engage. Like Richie Blackmore just does his medieval stuff with his wife in his
Yeah.
Blackmore's night. He doesn't beef with Ian Gillan anymore. Um,
Right. Yeah, yeah, people mature out of it, and you'll see. We thought in the '80s all these guitar players were rivals, like Ingve and Vi, but now Ingve has his show where he has all these guitarists on, and they're talking about all the good times that they had in the '80s together, and it's like we were duped. We thought that Ingve used to say bad stuff to like about Steve Vai in the magazines and
yeah, I
about
remember that. Yeah.
yeah, and it turns out that they were friends all along.
Yeah, I wonder with some of them if they were all like in on it. Like, what can we say about each other?
I wonder, yeah, because they've never said anything about. They never talk about rivalries. Now they talk about. Remember the time in Chicago when we bumped into each other and we took out
Yeah.
those go karts and
I mean, one that hasn't been resolved is the Schenkners,
yeah,
but it seems to be entirely on Michael's side.
yeah,
Andrew says, an interesting question that's raised is how often is not real metal just coded language for they threaten my picture of the scene, and why do image-based insults cut so deeply in a genre that claims to value substance over appearance?
Sure.
Um, yeah, that I mean that's true. There was an awful lot of not necessarily exactly rivalry, but put downs of well, you interview I don't know Blackie Lawless, and you're like, "What do you think about Poison?" And he's like, "Pfft, I don't even give them the time of day," you know?
Right.
'Cause why? Because 'Cause they're not real metal, right? We're doing real metal,
Yes.
whereas they're not. Um, why do image-based insults cut so deeply in a genre that claims to value substance over appearance? Um, I mean, because everybody's vulnerable to their images are in large part what they've got is their capital.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's that other one in one of the Metallica videos where was it Lars throwing darts at Kip Winger's picture?
Yeah,
Just um although that you wouldn't see that as a rivalry, but it would be like you're not metal. We're gonna the fans are gonna raise their fists at this. They're gonna be excited because we're real metal.
yeah,
Um
not poser, that was the
Not
word back
poser,
in the day,
yeah.
you know? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Ken says, "I think partly the appearance is supposed to be an authentic part of the substance. When it gets revealed as being fake, fans are disappointed." And that reminds me of, like, the Kiss thing, right? We know that 2 members of Kiss were definitely living the party lifestyle, while the other 2 were as sober as you could be and, maybe indulging in, sex, for a
Right.
while, but definitely not, like, getting loaded backstage. And when you find that out, you're like, "Well, that's not what I'd thought about, in the '70s and '80s with Kiss." So yeah.
Yeah, well, you got songs about partying and cold gin. It's
Yeah. We were singing that stuff before we even knew what it was talking about, you know?
That's right. Yeah.
Um, so that could be a little bit of a letdown. Finding out that, like, I don't know, a band that you think is a bunch of tough guys, are actually a bunch of pushovers, that could definitely be a thing. If
Yep.
you actually thought that Venom really was all about Satanism, and then you find out that, nah, that's, you know, just kind of our shtick, we're not actually sacrificing on altars, that could have been a letdown too, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a letdown because you might maybe identifying with what the band's singing about or appears to be part of, and then if you relate to that, it's kind of a letdown to say, "Oh, you were relating to something that wasn't really there."
Yeah. Well, we should wrap up. Any last things that you wanna say, Scott?
No, I think we covered a lot of good stuff. Um, but no, it was a really good one. The rivalries within bands is always a good one too.
Yeah, so we're gonna follow this up with one next month, specifically about we'll see if we have enough for an actual topic on this, opening versus, like, the established bands and the stuff that goes on between them,
Right.
and reversals that take place where you're like, "Well, clearly this opening band is better than the other band," and how those sorts of things play out. Because I think there's a lot of interesting music history there.
Yeah.
So all right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next time.